ये क्वेश्चन आपको बहुत बार पूछा गया होगा सोनम कि आप सिख हैं और फिर आप हाउ डू यू गेट इनटू सूफी म्यूजिक and I think your life transformed after you had a visit and a performance at Inayat Khan Dargah. But I know how it happened, but I want to hear from you. What were the feelings when you transformed and decided to change and inculcate Sufi music into your music? What was the feeling that time when you visited the Dargah?
So it wasn't specific to the dargah. It was interesting. And when you say this, I think that my entire childhood, my entire life has been leading me to this, and I'll explain how. I mean, I grew up in a Sikh family, but Sikhism, my parents, I think, and when I say they were the true Sikhs, because Sikh means disciple. Sikhism was created as a religion that wasn't that was supposed to break away from all these heavy rituals and these beliefs that God only existed in certain spaces and you had to behave. It was the idea that God was with you everywhere at all times in everyone, right? And therefore you must treat everyone as if they have the divine in them. You must behave in a particular way, right? So for me, I think just growing up in that understanding of the liberal Sikh, a syncretic faith that all people are equal, this is something that was just the kind of atmosphere that was there in our house. I think one of the earlier changes that happened for me, when you say it's transformative, was in 1984 when I was a very little girl and the anti Sikh riots happened. I remember very clearly just being completely mortified and horrified that the Sikhs were being attacked the way they were. And I mean, innocent men, women, children being killed and killed in the most inhuman manner. I mean, I remember a story where there was a man who lived next.
How old you were?
How old was I at that time? Would have possibly been about 9, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
quite able to understand
yeah,
that time.
able to understand, but also so afraid. I mean, I remember sleeping those 4 or 5 days in my parents' bed between them because I was shivering every night. It was so scary. And of course, there was no social media. I think it would have possibly made it worse. There was only Doordarshan. And we wouldn't get much news because it was government run. So they were controlling the message that was going out. However, everyone had telephones. So you were getting calls saying, Yahan se mob aa raha hai, wahan se mob aa raha hai. You could go out we would go onto our roofs and we could see smoke everywhere. And I'll tell you of two examples. I mean, I remember my grandfather's house, three examples actually. There was a man in a wheelchair next to that house. And I remember that hearing that the mob came to a man on the wheelchair and they put a burning tire on him. I mean, who does that? What causes human beings to do this to each other? My grandfather's house was surrounded. My grandfather is the hero of the Bangladesh war. So I'm the daughter of Lieutenant General J.S. Arora, who got Niazi to surrender. So obviously he was a prominent Sikh. He got surrounded, and my grandfather, being a proud prominent Sikh, had no intention of leaving his house till Mr. Gujral, like Gujral, sent a car saying, Jaggi, please, you are dear to us, and got him out of the house. Our own house. My parents would send, I'm one of three girls, every morning. I remember the first my mother packing a few valuables in a trunk, important papers, sending them to Hindu friends' homes, or relatives' homes, saying कि अगर सब बर्बाद हुआ कुछ तो होगा हमारे पास. And my two sisters, every morning for 4 days, my two sisters would go to my cousin's house. She was married to a Jain, and I would go. There was a gully behind my house. I would go to the house behind it. And I'm sharing this story, only because I want to tell you how much it impacted me. And I would go to that house behind, and from that house, I remember on day 3 of the riots, I remember looking at a bus that came to a house next to our house. And that used to be the owners of Texla TV. There was a brand called Texla TV. I don't know if you remember. And they came, a busload of men came out to attack these two Sikh men who were standing in their driveway because they were doing pehra. And they came out and they ran towards them. And this one old gentleman, he pulled out his talwar, which he must have carried when he got married, his kirpan, and he just held it up and he said, Bole so nihal. And they all stopped because they were not there to avenge the killing of their prime minister. They were there because they were rioting, and these were now no longer. These were not for the sake of any kind of virtue. They were being done because, let's not get into that. But there's so many. But the point is, the point. the point was that these two young Sikh, this Sikh man and his Sikh son, they were brave enough to stand up to this mob. The mob disappeared. The police came and helped. The mob disappeared. But the next house that they were going to go to was my parents' house. And I know we had a driver who stayed back, even though my parents had told everyone you can go. The driver went running to my father and said, Sahab, ab dusra ghar aapka hai, and they'll come to you. Now, all this while, very concerned friends used to ring up my father and say, my father's name was Surjit Singh. Please break your nameplate because it's a very obvious Sikh name. Please cut your hair. My father refused. He said, I'm not going to hide from who I am. And when the driver came and said, "Ab aap chale jaiye," um, my mother, he went to my mother first. My mother went to my father and said, let's go to Sonam. She's in the house behind. And my father said, I'm not going to be chased out of my own house. So my mother said, I'm not leaving you. So he said, you know what? We'll just sit here and face the consequences. And when I heard that story, I was so angry as a child. I said, how could you do this? You have three daughters. Now, when I think back, I have so much pride that they believed in who they were. They were not embarrassed, no matter how much people tried to frighten them. When push came to shove, they stood by their beliefs. And I think that really made me wonder. I said, how does humanity, just on the basis of a label, decide to hurt each other? What causes this kind of hatred? I think these thoughts had started emerging in my head. And it was interesting to me also to learn all these things about myself, because I used to sing, but I never wanted to sing in public. I never wanted to go out and do it. And why? I realize now is because when I sang, I felt I wanted to have something to say. I wanted to say what I believed in. When I started singing gospel music, it wasn't something that I searched for. It was, again, as I often like to listen to my heart, my inner voice. I used to sing Amazing Grace. Now, again, I don't understand, even as a Sikh girl, when I never grew up in a convent school, what caused me to sing gospel music or Christian music. But it used to keep coming back into my head. So I thought, let me learn it. I happened to be in Singapore on a holiday. I started learning. And then I started, every time I saved money, I said, वापस जाके थोड़ा और सीख लूंगी. ऐसे करते कराते एक पूरा साल बीत गया. And then when I came back, I did this concert. Then I started getting invited to sing in churches. And everyone would say, are you Christian? No, I'm a Sikhni. And they'd say, but तुम फिर ये क्यों गाती हो? And then again, I used to say, ऊपर वाले को पुकारने के लिए क्यों जरूरी है कि मैं किसी, why must I do it through a faith? मेरा मन जो चाहे, मेरा दिल जो चाहे, जिस लैंग्वेज में चाहे, जिस तरीके से चाहे, मैं उसे उस तरीके से क्यों नहीं पुकार सकती? ये रूल्स किसने बनाए हैं?
Yeah.
Right? And then what was lovely, and this was also transformative when you asked me, I got invited to sing gospel music in the dargah of Sufi Inayat Khan. And that's when I think I stopped and I thought, how beautiful is the universe, that as it is, I'm a Sikh girl who sings gospel music, and I'm confusing so many people because they're like, ye rules nahi follow kar rahi hai. And then what is wrong with her? And then and then God decides, ki Sonam, I will invite you to a dargah. And I felt like God is giving me this amazing message, this opportunity, maybe God, maybe the universe. And I said, I must do something. So when I performed there, before I performed, I had already started blending Sufi with gospel. But I did it, I think at the time, Shweta, I did it not really thinking of it intellectually, but only from my heart, intuitively. When I did the performance and when I was leaving the dargah, and I remember standing there waiting for I think my husband was coming to pick me up. And I was waiting at the corner, the words Sufi Gospel Project came to me. I heard them in my head. And that's when I realized, I said, okay, I have to think about this more. That's when I started to do the research. And for me, when I started researching it, it was fantastic because I said, सदियों पहले बुल्ले शाह भी वही चीज कह रहे थे, कबीर दास भी वही चीज कह रहे थे, Rabia al-Basri from Iran, Iran was saying the same thing. The gospel says the same thing. I mean, Rabia al-Basri, female mystic, which was in any case rare at the time, she writes one of the most beautiful things. She says, in my soul, there is a temple, a shrine, a church, a mosque that dissolve in God. Prayer should bring us to an altar where no walls or names exist. In my soul, there is a temple, a shrine, a church, a mosque that dissolve in God. And you won't believe it. A few weeks, in fact, a few days before, or the night before, and maybe, that I was presenting the Sufi Gospel Project for the first time, So when I presented it in the Dargah, it wasn't called the Sufi Gospel Project. I got the name when it came out, and then I created a show and a genre of music. It was at first a show, eventually it became a genre of music. My first show was at the Habitat. And I remember the night before I was going through my mother's diary. By this time, my mother had passed away. I was going through her diary, because I was missing her so much. And I found this beautiful katha written by her, this poem where she had written the same thing in different ways. And that's why I tell you that मुझे लगा कि मेरी पूरी जिंदगी में यहीं पहुंच, मतलब मुझे ये राह दिखाई जा रही थी. मेरी माँ दिखा रही थी, भगवान दिखा रहे थे, every influence, because she had written, गुरु मेरे साथ खड़े हैं, गुरु मेरे साथ खड़े हैं, गोविंद यहीं तो हैं, अल्लाह भी मौजूद है यहाँ, तो कौन कहाँ से. How beautiful it was. So, and I just said, for me it felt like I'm doing the right thing, and this is where I was meant to be. So it became the Sufi Gospel Project. When I presented it for the first time, I thought, log kya kahenge, again जो हम हमेशा सोचते हैं कि
How well it was accepted when you started.
it was unbelievably kindly accepted, and I can't tell you, every time I present it, people are so kind. And of course you'll have the one or two people who'll say, अच्छा ये तो बिल्कुल tradition तोड़ रही हैं. But मुझे अच्छा लगता है जब कोई कहता है कि tradition तोड़ रही है, because अगर हम वही चीज करते आएंगे जो सदियों से करे जा रहे हैं, तो result भी वही पाएंगे. We have, you have to also, if I am someone, if I believe myself to be a true Indian, what does that mean to me? To Sonam, it means that I speak English, I speak Hindi, I understand Urdu, I speak Punjabi. I have friends who are Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jain, Buddhist. If that's what it means to me to be an Indian, then why should I only restrict myself to singing in Punjabi, or only restrict myself to singing? If I've been exposed to Western music, I've studied Western music, I've studied Indian music, I love Carnatic music, why should I not put it all together? Who is stopping me?
I wish everyone learned the same thoughts that you have. This is the situation these days, the scenario that we see a lot on religion and caste and everything. It will all fade away.
Today I had such a lovely chat in the morning. I was talking to Malika Sarabhai. I'm doing a talk with her tomorrow. And she said, if more, and I'm going to quote her because I thought what she said was so wonderful. She said, if more parents brought their sons and daughters up as people and not as boys or girls or Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs or any other religion, we would have better citizens of this country, or we would have
I,
better citizens of this world.
I was reading one of your, not written by you, some interview, and when you said your father always told you that you're not equal to boys.
Much
You are
better.
much better than boys. So
I've
definitely,
always, I've always believed that. I have to say, I don't just believe that about me. I'm very biased. I believe all women are better than men. And I'll say this openly. And I'll say this for many reasons, because we can multitask. Men can barely do one task. Okay. We all have husbands, so we know that for a fact. But I mean, I'm saying this in a joke, but really, women have the ability to, because we are blessed with so many extra instincts, I'd say. Physically, yeah, maybe men have a bit of an advantage in terms of strength, but women are really catching up there as well. But there is nothing else that we can't do. And if you notice, and the more, I think the older I grow, the more and more I see this, the woman runs the house. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that she just says कि मैं खाना बनाऊंगी. She runs everything. She runs the machinery of a family's life. She runs the machinery of a family's life, right? Which means
you leave the
she's
house.
great.
You leave the house for one day and you come back and you will see the house in a different way.
You leave the children for one day, you see what happens. You leave anything. You know what I mean? Women are meticulous, women are detailed, women do it with love, they do it with compassion. You don't have to tell a woman how you're feeling because she can look at your eyes and tell you. I mean, so yes, my father was right.
Nobody, I must compliment men also, because I have seen so many men these days taking good care of the house, household work, taking care of
Yeah.
children, trying to pick it up. They're trying to pick it up.
I'll say it's good that men are finally discovering their feminine side. I'll still give the credit to women.
हमसे जुड़े रहने के लिए सब्सक्राइब करें यूट्यूब पर, फॉलो करें ट्विटर और इंस्टाग्राम पर, लाइक करें फेसबुक पर, और ज़्यादा जानकारी के लिए नेशनल खबर की वेबसाइट पर जाएं. आपको टाइप करना होगा सिर्फ नेशनल खबर.